Hi there, this is Matt Heffernan. Welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be doing the final episode of my series that is a tutorial on the XCI adventure game engine for the Commander X16 retrocomputer. So if you haven't watched any of this series before, I'd very highly recommend you go back to my channel. Of course, please subscribe and go back and start the series from the beginning, and you'll get some more context about what we're talking about today. What we've been doing throughout this series is we've been using XCI, which stands for not extensible, this isn't XML, extremely compact interpreter. So it allows you to create a point-and-click adventure game for the Commander X16 without having to do any sort of coding in BASIC or assembly language or any other sort of traditional from-scratch type programming. It lets you do everything with a very terse and simple language, and lets you very quickly put together a nice game. Like this example screen right here, where with apologies to both Georges Seurat and Stephen Sondheim, you can create nice little 16 color beautiful pixel art images, and then add some text, and you'll have a whole point-and-click interface to go with it. And so we're going to go and take a look at just some of the finishing touches that we can do on the game that we've been creating through this series. So there's not any real slides other than this one, just that I have a nice thumbnail to go into YouTube with. So looking back at what we had before, we had a few levels, not a lot going on. You know, I forgot to make this bigger. Let's actually be able to read the code. How about that? So what we had before, we had the first couple levels, which were very simple. The first one, we created a bouncing ball animation, but that bouncing ball animation was in just a blank background. So what we wanted to do, in fact, I should bring that up too, is in level 0, the only thing that I've changed for this video is added a bitmap background, this gym.data. And where did I get that from? Well, I went to our friend the internet and found this nice stock image of an old gymnasium, and just using a GIMP. If you've been watching this series, you'll know I really try to use as much free and open source software as possible to do this, because I don't believe that you should have to be outlying all sorts of money to sort of homebrew your own game, that there's enough good free software out there for you to be able to do whatever you want. And maybe if you had a few extra bucks, you could throw it at some more professional tools, but what's already out there is pretty good. So with GIMP, I was able to take that image and create this 16 color version of this gymnasium, and it looks pretty good. Since pretty much everything's brown, I can get a lot of shades of brown, get like black and white and nice 14 sort of shades of brown in between it. Not too bad. So this is going to be the background for what we saw in a couple of videos ago, was the bouncing dodgeball going around there. And otherwise, that really completes this level. Then for the next level, if you remember, all there was to it, and like we'll see here, was we had some tiles. There was no background bitmap. We just had tiles of a banana and the sprite of the Holy Grail. And you were able to buy these items just by clicking on them with money. Well, we wanted to create a better background for this, and to sort of have some sort of mechanism for actually using it. So here, through the magic of GIMP, I'll turn on the background that I created. Now I was able to use the screen capture of those tiles and sprites and use that to sort of build this very simple background. Now this is actually created with GIMP. In case you couldn't tell, I did not use any sort of stock images to create this. So just create a nice little shelf, and then this pedestal over here. And we wanted to make it so that in order for the user to win the game, All they have to do is buy the Holy Grail and then place it on this pedestal. And then we want to create a little animation for it to sort of get sucked down into that pedestal. And that was it. That's all we want to do. So this is our nice little framework for doing that. And what we're going to want to do is create some sprites to do the animation of that grail. We've already got the sprite for the grail itself, but we want little sprites for a trap door. So if I go back here to my spreadsheet, I created a trap door of basically these two sort of semicircular little hatch covers, if you will, and I wanted that to be able to sort of them to slide apart to expose a gap for the grail to fall into. So I only needed to do one of these parts because I'll be able to flip this sprite on the other side and be able to show them coming apart. I needed a hole, so I can actually use a sprite for a hole. The nice thing to remember about these sprites is that there's a sprite index. Before, when we were creating this, if I go back here to level 1, the initial grail, we're using sprite index 1. Now, the lower the sprite index that you use, it's the higher up in the Z order it is. So basically, every other sprite is going to be behind sprite 1, except for the mouse cursor, which of course is sprite 0. And that's a good way of being able to do that. So what we're going to do is say we want to have, obviously we didn't want to change this sprite frame here for the original grail. So we wanted to create a nice set of layers so that when we put the grail back on there, first we want to make sure we have something that is going to, the grail to fall behind. And so we create this little mask, which is going to be sprite frame 2. So this right here is going to go beneath the hole for the grail to actually fall behind. So it goes through the slip. Of course, remember, everything black is transparent, so you'll see the grail going through that hole. And then we're going to have the hole as frame 10, so that instead of having to actually put the hole in the background, I could just keep it flat. And I'll be able to have the hole just as a sprite and have a bit more control over its placement and the sharpness of its pixels and all of that. I could have easily just put this into the background, but this gives me a little more flexibility. Like if I wanted to move the hole, I could always do that. And then on top of the hole, but underneath the grail, would be the covers, so that we can set the grail on top of the cover, and the covers pull away, and the grail falls between there, so the grail is still staying on top of this hole, but then behind the mask. And then it falls out of sight, and then the doors will cover it back up. Now, you'll notice in these colors here, it's got this red and yellow, and because I'm using the default palette right here. But what we're going to actually do is use the palette for this background. So this is a custom palette that gets created. And if we look here in GIMP, this of course is the RGB version, so I don't see the palette. So in order to create that RGB version, first I got rid of that layer with the extra graphics on top. Now here's the actual background layer. And then that was used to create this PNG version of it, where now we have this 16 color palette. You can see we got different shades of sort of teal and brown and gold, and we were able to use that. And if we were looking at sort of the top of this pedestal, that was this color right here, color index 7. So that's how, if we look back here in the spreadsheet, 7 in the default palette is yellow, and that's how I'm getting this color. This just using yellow. So this will be the exact same color as the top of the pedestal where we see yellow here. And then red, that's index 2. And if we look back again at here, index 2 is the darkest brown color that we have. And this is actually a shade that's used for doing some anti-aliasing for this shelf up here. And so we're using that as a very dark opaque color, which is what we wanted to have. But and still in this spreadsheet, we use these default palette colors because they're more easily differentiable, if that's a word. I don't know. It's kind of late I'm doing this. I just wanted to get this video finished. So if we go back and look into the sprites.hex file, you can see here I've added these 3 sprites, and I'm using that indexes 2 and 7. And so it makes it pretty simple. You'll also notice here that I've got the this index 7 color going all the way to the bottom. This to make sure that the grail can fit nice and snug down into there and be totally covered. But then we have a little more flexibility in the placement so that we don't have to have the whole bottom all masked out. So if I wanted to move that hole closer to the bottom, I'd have those little notches so that it wouldn't be creating little corners over here. And that's just some of the things to consider while you're creating these sort of overlay graphics. So that's how I did that. And then if we look here at the code, how did I add that? So like I said before, we already had this sprite frames 1, and then we just go ahead and add all the rest of these sprites. Now there's no real sort of frame animation for any of these sprites. All these sprites have the same frame, so I just defined the single frame for each of these. But you'll notice here, like with the Grail, I'm using that palette offset 0 to use the default palette. But for the other sprites, I'm using palette offset 2. Now, why 2? Well, 2 is the palette offset for level 1 in any zone. And basically, so that's all you got to do is just whatever the level number is, you add 1 to it, and that is going to be the palette. Because, like I said, palette offset 0, that's the default palette. But then for level 0, it uses the next palette offset 1, for its background bitmap. And this way now, I know if I'm in level 1 and I use palette offset 2, then that's going to be the exact same 16 color palette used by the background. So I'll be able to precisely match the colors that are behind it with these sprites. And so there, and then I have very precise placements here with these sprite instructions. I'm able to nicely overlay them so that they're all exactly where I want. And initially, I don't see the mask because that blends into the background. I don't see the hole because it's covered up. All I see is the left cover and the right cover. And there I can see I'm using sprite index or sprite frame index 9 and 9H. So I'm flipping a sprite horizontally, this guy right here. So the left side of the cover is the normal one, the right side of the cover is flipped horizontally, and then they're just butted up against each other. And so then I still have these original triggers in there for buying the items. And then I added a new trigger, this use trigger for this area, these tile coordinates, and that's going to roughly translate to this area. Let me go back here where it's bigger. And we can see here there's some sort of fuzzy text. And of course that's going to be something when you're creating a game, you're going to maybe have something in your world, in your background, that is clearly some sort of text, but with only 320 by 200 pixels, you can't really do a whole lot of clear or legible text in there. So this provides a trigger so that when I mouse over it, I'm going to see the little use cursor come up, and I'll be able to let the player know that, oh, yes, there is something that will happen when you click on it. And that's when it's going to go ahead and say, yes, it's a plaque that reads, place Grail here to win. Well, there we go. That's as good as a hint as you're ever going to want to hope for. And then after that, I have another trigger, and this is an item trigger for that Grail. Before I had item triggers for the money to buy the Grail. So like right here is the trigger where I bought the grail, and I've got the item grail. I get 1 grail. And then here in this item trigger, it requires the possession of 1 grail. And then, of course, the second argument is there's the cost of 1 grail. So once you click this trigger, you are going to lose that grail. It will automatically be removed from your inventory. And that's anywhere in this sort of box here. Now, of course, the grail cursor is the same sprite. So rather than necessarily being the upper left corner to click on it, we want to basically be able to hover that grail over the area roughly where it's going to sit, and just have it just drop into place. And that's exactly what it does here. So we say sprite 3, which, as you remember, was also the grail. But now using the index 3, that allows us to place it between the mask and the covers and the hole. So we can be over these, but behind the mask. Simple enough. So we just place that there. And then we wait a second so that we can behold the grail sitting on the pedestal. And then it plays after 1 second, 60 jiffies, it plays a sound effect. Now you notice I've added like 3 sound effects to this level. There's close, drop, and open. And these all came from the YouTube sound effects library. And I just edited them down to some very basic things. So you're going to hear the sound of the doors quickly opening. And then we're going to see here this sprite movement where we're going to move over the course of half a second, which is 16 jiffies. So every 2 jiffies, we are going to move 1 pixel. And ultimately, we're going to do that 8 times. So we're going to move those doors apart, all the 8 pixels apart, so that the whole hole is revealed. And then we're going to wait a quarter of a second. And then we're going to start making the grail drop. There we're taking, so sort of in a cartoon sort of way, you get that little moment where there's nothing underneath that object, and it's just sort of in suspended animation. And then it just realizes it has gravity, has a weight, and it's going to drop. So we get that quarter of a second. It's going to drop down here, and it's going to, again, quickly go down. So every 2 jiffies, 30 frames a second, it's going to start dropping down 1 pixel until all 16 pixels are down, so that we can no longer see the sprite of the grail. And so we're going to wait 40 jiffies, and that's going to give us enough time for the grail to go out of sight, because that'll take 32 jiffies. And then we're going to play this drop sound effect, which is going to sound like a metal thing falling on a floor. And that's pretty much what's happening. And then we're going to wait half a second, and then we're going to play this closing sound effect for these doors. Now, more slowly, it's at half the speed at which they opened. You can see here, instead of a 2 jiffy frame delay, there's a 4 jiffy frame delay. So it'll take over half a second for those doors to close back up, and we're playing this sort of sliding sound, which we call close. And then a second after starting that, it'll take only 32 seconds for those to finish closing. And then we're going to automatically go to a new level, Zone 0, Level 2. And what's that going to be? Well, it's pretty simple. It's just going to say, hey, you win. And it's going to reuse the Chase Fault win music, which in the main example game for XCI is actually the opening music. It's the title screen music. But we're just going to reuse that because who needs to write more music for these little tutorials? And then for the background, we're going to have some little celebratory fireworks. And so I found some more free clip art of some fireworks. And then I went ahead and made it into 16 color, 320 by 200. And there it is. Our nice little celebratory finale for our game. And that's it. That's all it takes to really finish our game, to actually have some sort of little puzzle for the user to go through. A little introductory animation, and then a little puzzle to do, and then a nice reward. And there we have basically the full arc of a game writ extremely small. So again, the beginning of the game, if you go back to that very first episode, you see how we created this start screen where we sort of tease a Pokemon game, and then, oh, there's no actual Pokemon here, sorry. All right, so now we'll start the new game, and now we're going to see this new background of the gymnasium. And we can hear the dodgeball going around. I didn't find a good sound for a rolling dodgeball. I wasn't too concerned. And so we click on that, and now here's the new version of this level. And we can see everything is up on the shelf, and now we see that those little trapdoor covers nicely put up there. And then, oh, now we can see that this new trigger, I can click that, and it says, it's a plaque that reads, place Grail here to win. I was able to use the other text style, so we can have some yellow text for stuff written on this golden plaque. All right, so I gotta buy a Grail. I click on that. Oh, Grails are one easy payment of $9,999. Well, oh gosh, do I have money? Let's look at my inventory. Oh, I got plenty of money. So I'm going to go ahead and buy me a Grail. Oh, now I've got a Grail. All right, well, let's place it on that pedestal so that I can win. I'll place it right here. There it is. And down it goes. And I win. Oh, isn't that great? So that's it. And now, of course, this music is just going to play over and over again. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Now here, I'll let you I'll play through this again. You can hear all the sound effects. Oh, nice bounce. You know, even really with these pretty low definition sound effects, it still is a reasonable facsimile of these sounds. It's still definitely a sampled sound, and it sounds pretty good. All right, let's buy that Grail one more time, and then I'll let you hear all those sound effects. Oops, let me actually get the Grail. Here we go. There we go. That's it. So that's the whole game. This was, of course, a pretty short video. I've gone into great detail in all the other videos about how to do everything. And so what I hope you do is you do go back and watch at least the videos that you're concerned about, the different aspects of the game, because there's a lot of stuff within XCI that's optional. You don't have to have sound effects. You don't have to have music. You don't have to have text. There's a lot of different things that you don't really have to bother with doing. You don't even have to have real animation. You could just have static backgrounds. It's all up to you. And I do recommend that you go here. There's the GitHub link in the description of the video for the actual repo itself. And within the repo there is this tutorial guide, and you'll be able to go through and see links to all the slides that are used in each of these, and links back to all the different individual YouTube videos. And by the time you see this up on YouTube, there will be an entry for this very video. And with that, our tutorial is done. So I really hope that you found this whole series informative. I will definitely be doing more videos about XCI. There is a new game for XCI that I'm going to be creating. That's going to be the focus of my efforts going forward now that the engine is pretty much in place. And we'll be getting some nice demos of that as we go along. But as far as tutorial videos go, this is going to be it until I add a new feature that requires a new video. So I hope that this has inspired you to go ahead and create something of your own, to realize that it doesn't necessarily have to be a huge learning curve, that you have to dive right into assembly language or try to make something work with some sort of creaky old-fashioned language like BASIC. that you can create something with modern tools and do some nice cross development, and most importantly, to use some of the time that we now find ourselves having with our current situation. And a lot of folks are out of work and are really looking for something other than sitting around and watching TV to do, especially since they can't even go out, even if they do have a job, and are just busy working at home all day. And just trying to think of something to do with this time. And I think learning some new skills, learning how to create graphics, create music, and do everything with a bunch of free tools that you don't have to go out and invest a whole lot of money in. You can go ahead and just get started doing that today. And then years later, when we look back on this time, rather than being something where we really weren't accomplishing much, that the world just sort of stopped, that instead you're looking back on this time where you took the initiative to learn something new and then create something, so that your actual souvenir of this time is this awesome creation that you now have and can share with the world. And this is how you took advantage of a crisis. So speaking of crisis, you can't actually create a version of Crisis, but you could create a really cool like SCI or Scum type game with XCI, and that's what I hope you do. So thank you, and I will talk to you again very soon. Bye bye.